You're watching Bloomberg Law. I'm Pacchia. Last week, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments on 4 specific provisions of a controversial new immigration law in Arizona known as SB 1070. The federal government is challenging the state law, arguing that Arizona is essentially overreaching. We're joined now by Careen Shannon. She's an attorney at Fragomen, and Ian Millhiser from the Center for American Progress. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
So at issue are measures that would make it illegal to work or reside if you're an undocumented individual in Arizona. There's also a provision in there that requires police to determine a person's immigration status at lawful stops, detentions, or arrests. And there's finally another piece that authorizes warrantless arrests based on probable cause that someone is in the country illegally. Strong stuff. Careen, let's start with you. Constitutionality aside, I wonder how workable this law is. Despite what the statute may say, it's really directed at people coming to Arizona from Mexico. That covers millions of people. Now we have a law that basically criminalizes them, some of them, over their immigration status. In terms of net effect on our legal system and rule of law, what are the implications of that policy?
Well, I think the implications are rather disturbing. We have a law whose purpose is basically to make life so inhospitable for millions of people that they will self-deport. First of all, I just don't think that comports with American values to create that kind of environment for people, whether you're here lawfully or not. Second of all, notwithstanding the focus during the oral arguments of the Supreme Court on whether the state law is merely helping to effectuate federal law, there are a lot of inconsistencies in the language of the Arizona statute that don't take into account very subtle distinctions of what is or is not lawful immigration status under federal law.
Ian, what jumps out at you? We had oral arguments last week. As we said before, this is essentially about whether the Arizona law preempts the Constitution and federal law. Immigration policy is supposed to be designed and carried out by the federal government. This seems like an open and shut case to me. What ambiguity brought this case before the Supreme Court?
No, it is odd that this case has gone as far as it has. You know, the normal rule is that immigration is a foreign policy issue, and for the same reason that we don't allow Arizona to declare war on Mexico and we don't allow Arizona to sign a treaty with China, we don't allow Arizona to decide how foreign nationals are treated within U.S. borders. It's a foreign policy issue. The exception to that rule is that if the federal government passes a law giving a state permission to play around in the immigration space, then the state is allowed to act within the scope of that permission. The problem with this case is that the Supreme Court has started to read federal laws way too broadly in terms of how much permission they grant. You know, what happened here is that the law says Arizona can cooperate with the Attorney General, and I'll just say that if the Attorney General is suing you to get you to stop doing something, you ain't cooperating with them.
Right, that's certainly an odd dynamic. Careen, the justices at the Supreme Court seemed very skeptical of the federal government's presentation at oral arguments. Is that an indication of how they're going to rule?
I think it is probably an indication of how they're going to rule. I think in part, notwithstanding the Solicitor General's brilliant presentation on many levels, the fact that neither of the attorneys arguing the case are experts in immigration law meant that there were a lot of questions that went unanswered. The justices were obviously focusing on the supremacy issue, federal versus state law. Again, they weren't really even given the opportunity to understand the ways in which the state law conflicts with the federal law. It's not merely a means to effectuate existing federal policy. In fact, in some cases, it's a misunderstanding of existing federal policy.
So it looks like they're almost setting themselves up for a partial ruling. Which parts of the law are going to be upheld and which, if any, are going to be knocked down, in your opinion?
Well, I tend to think the 2 sections having to do with inquiries and arrests by law enforcement will probably be upheld, just based on the tone during the oral arguments. I don't know if Ian agrees with that or not.
Yeah, Ian, does that comport with what you're hearing as well? well?
Yeah, I think that's about right. You know, again, the federal law says that the states are allowed to cooperate with the Attorney General, and the justices, or at least 5 of them, seem to think it is cooperating to identify undocumented people that can then be referred to the Attorney General or to the Department of Homeland Security. But like some of the other provisions, the provisions making it a crime essentially to be physically present in Arizona if you're undocumented, the provision making it a crime to apply for work if you're in Arizona and undocumented. Some of those provisions, I think, are still getting struck down. But what's probably the core of this statute, the so-called "show me your papers" provision that allows police to detain undocumented people, that's probably getting upheld.
And it follows, if that part of the law is upheld, the "show me your papers" provision, is it safe to assume that other states are going to follow along with similar laws on their own books?
Well, we're already seeing them. I mean, we're seeing them in Georgia. We're seeing them in Alabama. The Alabama law is actually very aggressive and has provisions that help drive school children out of school. It has one provision that some agencies have interpreted to prevent immigrants from getting water in their homes. So we're already seeing copycat bills, and unfortunately, I think we're going to see more if any part of this law is upheld.
I want to talk a little bit about the economic effects of this law. Careen, we were talking before about a study released by the Pew Hispanic Center. They said migration of undocumented immigrants from Mexico is abating. It almost ran into a brick wall. I've never seen macro statistics quite like this. They've said that it's basically at 0 or perhaps even negative. That is to say, no one is coming across the border to live and work in the United States. If this is true and migration is essentially down to 0, is there going to be enough political will after the economic effects are felt in Arizona and other states to keep laws like this on the books?
Well, that's an interesting question. There may not be, and I think even in Arizona, there's been some sense that maybe the law went too far. It's no coincidence that State Senator Russell Pierce, who was a driving force behind the law, was voted out of office in a recall election. I think it also shows that notwithstanding laws that are on the books, migration is driven by other forces. There's the their push and pull factors. The pull factor from the U.S. side are the jobs. And if the jobs aren't available, there's no incentive for people to come unlawfully or not. I think, too, speaking to Ian's point, of course, I agree that there will be, if these laws are upheld, these provisions are upheld, a number of copycat laws. There already are some. I think we'll also see the opposite, though. We'll see some states trying to position themselves as being more hospitable to immigrants. I really don't think that people are going to self-deport back to their home countries based on laws like this. They may go over the internal borders to other states where life is easier and more hospitable.
Ian, what do you make of it? Do you think states like Arizona are going to be sorry, at least in economic terms, that they ever even contemplated laws like this?
Well, a lot of states already are sorry. The worst hit states right now are agricultural states that frequently depend upon immigrant laborers. And you're hearing story after story of crops rotting in fields. I read one story about a poor farmer who lost $800,000 worth of crops because he didn't have enough labor to help him pick them. You're hearing stories of tremendously embarrassing examples, like the Mercedes executive in Alabama who was pulled over because he was German and didn't have papers and was treated as if he was in the country illegally.
Right.
So you don't want to see farmers unable to sell their crops. You don't want to see major businesses that are major employers in states having blow-ups with senior executives. And yes, I do think that you're going to see more and more lawmakers realizing that they've made a mistake.
We're also seeing interesting developments out of the Senate. New York Senator Charles Schumer is claiming that he's going to push a bill that essentially is going to undo all of this and block Arizona law by making it clear that Congress doesn't intend for states to enact their own immigration enforcement strategies. Ian, what do you make of it? Does this have any legs?
I mean, if it passes, then that's a solution. The problem is that our Congress is largely incapable of governing right now. You know, even if you can get it through John Boehner's House, you still have to get it past a filibuster in the Senate. And I'm skeptical in general of Congress's ability to do much of anything right now, much less pass a bill overruling an erroneous Supreme Court decision on a politically contentious issue.
Careen, bring us home here. Is this entire episode going to give us some movement at the federal level in terms of coming up with a cohesive strategy to deal with the immigration issue?
Well, one would hope so. I mean, obviously what has been driving these laws is the fact that we have not been able to see comprehensive immigration reform enacted at the federal level. There is that gridlock in Congress. There has been for such a long time. I don't see that ending anytime soon. So despite, you know, people's best efforts and intentions, I actually don't see any federal comprehensive immigration reform happening in the near future.
All right, Careen, Ian, I want to thank you so much for your time today. We'll have to see how this contentious issue plays out.
Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about the cases or issues we just discussed, be sure to check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates on Twitter. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching.